What's going on YouTube? Lil Unc back into the reaction. Today we got part 2 of the Gangs of London, Moscow17 v Zone 2, you know what I'm saying? If you want to check out the last one be before you get done with this one, at the end of the video, stay tuned, man. Stay tuned. Like the video, comment, subscribe, go to the band, follow me on Instagram at Lil Unc Official, link in the description. Let's get into it.
Members by name. From here, things would continue to go back and forth on wax, with members from each side continuing to use their songs to brazenly brag about the violent attacks that they had carried out on their ops. And all of this seemingly without a care in the world as to how incriminating this might come across. And eventually, each group respectively got their own Tim Westwood crib session. Performances which once again were wall to wall, with specific references to names and claims of attacks that had been carried out against the other side. Now obviously, all of the name calling on both sides had everybody involved very jumpy and eager to pounce on the ops. And a lot of incidents between these crews in 2017 do remain in the streets, and I suppose to a lesser extent in the Reddit and YouTube comments. But eventually in 2017, the beef would become deadly and finally reach the newspapers, when a teenage Zone 2 affiliate was killed in the middle of Peckham. Now during the height of this beef, Incognito was known for spinning blocks on his moped, looking for ops in broad daylight, even broadcasting this activity on his Snapchat, as was Jet Black and Loose Screw, as well as Zone 2 members. However, rolling around in highly populated areas of London with dangerous weapons is a very hot activity and not really advisable. So in May of 2017, JB from Moscow17 was apparently arrested after being caught with a samurai sword in public. Whilst he was being arrested, it is alleged that a Zone 2 member actually witnessed the arrest, and while it's not definitively clear exactly who that was, what we do know is that that man's younger brother was a young man named Abdirahman Mohammed, aka Abz. Now Abz had allegedly been mocking Jet Black for this arrest, something which was taken as the utmost disrespect. So around 3 weeks after the samurai sword arrest, it was alleged that Incognito and Jet Black had caught Abz eating food outside of a chicken shop in Peckham on Southampton Way, and at around 11 PM on the 2nd of June 2017, it was alleged that Abz was approached by 2 men and stabbed in the chest with a large knife. The suspects fled the scene, leaving Abz to die outside of the Tesco in Peckham. Not long after this, both Incognito and Jet Black were charged with murder and set for a trial at the Old Bailey. This is one of Britain's oldest and most serious criminal courts, with a history dating all the way back before the 1800s. The trial started at the end of 2017, and jurors were even played music by the defendants which referenced carrying weapons, along with images of JB being arrested with the sword, and with the defendants being identified by a friend of Abz who was with him at the time of the murder. However, Incognito and Jet Black went with the defense that they were being falsely identified by Abz's friend on purpose because of an ongoing grudge. And despite CCTV evidence and witness testimony, the jury believed this. And so, after a 5-week trial in January 2018, Incognito and Jet Black were both acquitted of murder. And considering how much of a brazen attack this was, ultimately resulting in a unanimous not guilty verdict, it's no surprise that sometime after they were let out, we saw Incognito talking about the case being even more brazen on Snapchat, explaining Abz's connection to the Moscow Zone 2 beef in response to people suggesting that Abz was just a civilian and not involved in the feud, even going as far to say that despite being innocent, whoever did the crime should be proud.
Oh, civilian did that for too long. Obviously, I'm innocent, like I said, but I'm just stating facts. Like, my man was relevant to the batch. He wasn't a main 2. I'm innocent, like I said, but he was, like, get me? So whoever dropped him, they should be proud in it. And it wasn't me. I'm innocent, like I said. Whatever, just stop chatting shit for the scoreboard and to make, you're denying your mates.
And it wasn't just these brash public statements on social media. Incognito was as bold in his lyrics as he was in his socials. For example, in his feature on Lowski's track Stevie Wonder, he seems to wear the specifics of this incident as a badge of pride, referencing dodging a 25-year sentence, incriminatingly shouting out his co-defendant Jet Black's habit of carrying and concealing a samurai sword, saying that he steps for the kill, and that both him and JB tore the Ock block and splashed man down, referring to stabbing. I mean, Incognito was basically acting as if he was completely untouchable. However, eventually Moscow17 would find themselves grieving too, as eventually it would appear that Zone 2 would catch up with their star member, committing a crime that many would think is completely unthinkable in a country where guns are totally illegal. We now know from media reports sometime after this incident happened that GB had already been stabbed by a rival gang member some time ago, an incident where a knife narrowly missed his heart and he was lucky to survive. And at that point, GB was only around 15-16 years old. Consider that with the kind of troubles that JB and Incognito were going through, then it's no surprise that at a certain point his mother, in fear for his safety, would send GB to Jamaica. There he would stay with his uncle in an effort to stay out of trouble and practice his rapping. And GB would spend around a year in Jamaica, but eventually he got bored, missed his friends, and made the decision to return to London to unite with his Moscow crew and try and make it as a rapper once again. So he would return to London around February 2018, and for around 3 months he would get on with his life without anything happening. But that would all change on May the 5th, 2018. On this day, GB had been playing football at a pitch nearby the Brandon estate. But according to his mother and other people who were there that day, word began to spread amongst the local community that gang members from Peckham were driving around the area looking for ops. In fact, there had actually been reports of shots fired in Peckham the night before this, an incident which many believe was carried out by Moscow17. Apparently 3 men riding on 2 mopeds had opened fire on an individual on a push bike but missed. So it's entirely possible that the day after, Zone 2 members were in Moscow looking for retaliation. Eventually, it would seem that the Peckham boys caught up with GB, and in a scene that would shock many, they would open fire on him from a vehicle with a shotgun, hitting him in the chest and leaving him for dead. Members of the community frantically tried to provide medical attention to GB, but sadly it was too late and he would ultimately pass away at the scene.
A 17-year-old boy has died after being shot in Southwark in South London. Officers, including police, firearms and air ambulance, attended the scene. The victim was pronounced dead just before 7 o'clock last night. The next of kin has been informed. As yet, no arrests have been made.
After GB's killing, Moscow17 and the local community were absolutely devastated. Locals would eventually march through Peckham singing Moscow March, and Moscow17 would go on to release the tribute track Did You See, featuring a posthumous hook performed by GB and the song being dedicated to his memory. But it wasn't just Moscow and the local community reacting to GB's death, because after this shocking incident went down, the Metropolitan Police decided to crack down on drill videos, forcing YouTube to remove around 30 music videos from various drill acts at the time, with many of these being hit songs belonging to Moscow17, including Moscow March, that had over 1 million views. A little while after this, the remaining members of Moscow17 sat down for an interview with your #1 journalist, Mr. Montgomery, where they touched on some of the events that had transpired up until this point, discussing both the removal of their music videos and providing a very profound perspective on whether or not UK drill music was actually contributing to the violence in the streets. A quote which went on to be misinterpreted and misused by many in the mainstream media.
But okay, let's be honest here. Big man thing, like, do you think drill music incites violence?
It does influence it. You got to put your hands up and say drill music does influence it, innit? But knife crime and gun crime has been happening before drill music.
Way before drill music.
So if you want to talk about 10 years, 20 years back, people are still getting chefed up. Yeah. You get it? And there's many ways to solve it. You can bring out youth clubs. You can bring out many other things, invest money into other things to help the community. But you don't want to do that. You just want to use an excuse as drill music. It's drill music, or black boy drill music. No. How about you go invest money, you go make some youth centres? What can we turn to? There's nothing for us to turn to.
Later in this interview, Incognito would go on to be strangely self-aware. When pondering how he might stay safe and change his ways, he said that his mum would tell him to change his friends. He says that's never going to happen, and ultimately, whatever happens, happens.
The answer to that question, my mum would say change your friends. But that's not going to happen. So I guess we just, I don't know, whatever comes my way, innit?
Considering the way Incognito was talking in this interview, it's almost as if he knew what was going to happen next. Because within only 2 months of this interview being released, unfortunately, Incognito would suffer a similar tragic fate to GB, only yards away from where his friend had passed. After Incognito was acquitted of killing Abz, it's said that he was a major target. But strangely, the official version of this story would suggest that Incognito's downfall was a complete coincidence and nothing to do with the Zone 2 beef. Not everyone believes this, and some of the details are hard to swallow. But regardless of what you think, the facts are, on August the 1st, 2018, allegedly Incognito and a couple of other Moscow youngers were hanging out on a spot near the Brandon estate selling drugs. Warren Street to be specific, the very same street where GB died, with this incident literally going on only yards away. Another detail that just makes it so difficult to comprehend that these incidents are unrelated. But at a certain point, a man reportedly in his 30s had been in the area and, according to police, had dialed a phone number associated with Incognito. One might assume that he'd simply been given his number and wanted to pick up whatever he was selling on the block, but we'll never know whether they had some sort of pre-existing relationship. After making the call, the man would eventually meet Incognito on Warren Street. It's at this point that Incognito was seen on CCTV grabbing the man's arm while one of his youngers took his watch and placed it in his pocket. This was the apparent robbery of the man's Cartier watch. Apparently, after the watch was taken, Incognito and his boys ran off, with the man who'd been robbed taking chase. And eventually he did catch up, with a struggle taking place. Knives were pulled out and 3 people were left at the scene suffering serious stab injuries. One of those would be incognito, with him unfortunately passing away 40 minutes after the incident as a result of shock and blood loss. The man who had been robbed of his watch was ultimately responsible for the wound that ended incognito's life, with this incident seemingly having nothing to do with the Zone 2 beef. And whilst that man was charged with murder initially, he was eventually acquitted of both murder and manslaughter following a 2-week trial at the Old Bailey. The prosecution said that incognito had started it, but the killer had ultimately finished it, but the jury ultimately deciding that the man was defending himself, a position that was likely largely helped by the fact that one of the younger members that was there that day was apparently carrying a large knife on behalf of incognito. In some ways, incognito's killer being completely acquitted of murder was incredibly poetic, considering the fact that only months before, incognito himself had also been cleared of murder at the Old Bailey in a case that seemingly had mountains of evidence against him. But regardless of whether or not this incident had anything to do with the Zone 2 beef, the murder of 2 young men on exactly the same street in such a short space of time brought enormous amounts of police and media attention. From here, the Sun newspaper and other British media outlets begun waging war on drill music, specifically singling out the likes of Tim Westwood, smearing him for even giving these drill rappers a platform to begin with. And following these incidents and their association with drill music, the Metropolitan Police expanded their crackdown, forcing YouTube to remove even more drill videos in the years that followed, even using behaviour orders to ban other drill sets like West London-based 1011 from making music at all without police approval. And while the posthumous album from the slain drill rapper has become a bit of a staple in hip-hop recently, Incognito's family actually came out releasing a statement that they would not be allowing any more of his music to be released, dashing fans' hopes of hearing his long-teased Pray for Crosses mixtape. And if the loss of GB and Incognito wasn't bad enough, Moscow17 members would continue to suffer in the months that followed. Jet Black from Moscow also ended up getting jail time for numerous incidents that had occurred on the streets during these deadly times, including a crazy police chase where he crashed his car and fled, leaving behind a large knife. And then, whilst he was on bail for that, allegedly a rival had spotted him out on the street in Camberwell, mounted the pavement and run him over, with witnesses saying that once Jet Black got up, he produced a large machete. These incidents would leave him jailed, as well as receiving a lifetime ban from ever entering Peckham. So from here, for a significant amount of time, Moscow17 as a cohesive group and/or gang would disband and fall from relevance. And the passing or incarceration of their star members made it near impossible for the crew to pick up any meaningful momentum around this time. Meanwhile, capitalizing off of the reputations gained from seeming to come out on top in these violent feuds, Zone 2 and many of their affiliated members like Quangface, Trizak, Karma or PS would release hit drill songs racking up millions of views. However, not all was good over in the Zone 2 camp, because those members who were more active on the streets than in the booth would ultimately find themselves in hot water. For example, D Squeezo from Zone 2 would end up being convicted of murder and sentenced to life following a non-gang related incident over some drug money, along with fellow Zone 2 member Mad Max allegedly fleeing the UK due to his involvement in that same deadly attack, as well as it being suggested by some that he was also wanted in connection with the shooting of GB. And while from here the bloodshed in the streets between these two groups would die down, in the booth Zone 2 members would continue to disrespect Incognito's memory as well as other Moscow members on songs in years to follow. This includes Incognito's own cousin Trizak from Zone 2, who would famously call himself Judas, regularly hopping on songs and disrespecting his very own cousin's tragic murder. In fact, Zone 2 have continued to gain clout by mercilessly dissing their deceased ops by name on numerous songs, most notably the 2019 release No Censor, a track made even more devilish by the fact that they played the sonic coin sound effect each time they mentioned a murdered op by name. This track was singled out as probably the most demonic and offensive Zone 2 diss track ever released, with the track predictably quickly being removed from YouTube by the Metropolitan Police, with YouTube releasing a statement saying that they are working with the Met to remove videos which are directly inciting violence. However, the thing is, the song has been re-uploaded numerous times, and ironically the Metropolitan Police's attempts to silence this music only brought it more attention, as the removal of the track No Censor led to Zone 2 getting mainstream coverage on BBC News, with the headline "Drill Video Naming Murder Victims Banned by YouTube," only further feeding into the idea held by fans that Zone 2 are the most demonic and evil set in UK drill. In fact, it almost seemed as if Zone 2 knew this was going to happen, because they very quickly brought out new songs which included similar but censored disses, like the tracks Dead and Censored, which both racked up enormous view counts off of the back of the track No Censor being removed by the police. Today, only a small selection of members from Moscow17 continue to make music, like Screw and Maysky, and even these new songs contain lyrics and disses targeting Zone 2 members and insulting their fallen brothers like Abz. I really wish I could have ended this story by saying that those involved in both sides that were still alive managed to find some musical success and ultimately move forward beyond these beefs, making catchy drill songs that the fan love without insulting the memory of a fallen op. But sadly, that's not the case, and it seems like just far too much blood has been shed on both sides for these groups to ever forget the trauma that they went through during the bloody summer of 2018.
Oh, that was over.
I'm here on Warham Street, the street where GB and Incognito tragically lost their lives. And the fact that they were taken so young is made all the more painful when you consider just how musically talented they were. In the years that have followed their tragic passing, we've seen the likes of Digga D and Heady One make it in the music industry, becoming genuinely successful mainstream music artists, getting far away from the dangerous blocks that they came from. So if there's one thing that I hope, going forward, young men from difficult areas and difficult backgrounds like this can realise that there is another way and they can make it out through music and not suffer the same tragic fate as GB and Incognito.
R.I.P. man, R.I.P. Alright, that's the end of this one, y'all. If y'all enjoyed this one, like, comment, subscribe. Check out the last Trap Lord Ross reaction. It's gonna be right on your screen, you know what I'm saying? Road to being, follow me on Instagram at Lil Unc Official, link in the description. I'm out of here, y'all.